okay, let me do some research, let me talk with other people about what they use, email Sean, get a recommendation from him, and I've got a whole year in Luke next year, so I'm going to spend $50 and invest in something that I can take with me through that year and use that to help me to learn and engage with the text more. That seems to me to be a significantly important potential investment. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting by any means that everyone here needs all of these commentaries. I'm suggesting these kinds of works are the kinds of works that will help you to get to that level of detail. Yeah, other questions? Yes?
I'd like to take exception with where you began.
Yep.
One called using a previous interpretation.
Yep.
Because that's exactly what I do.
Yep.
You know, look up the lectionaries, Luke 2. Oh yes, I've got a sermon on that. Now that's the way I begin. I might take out that sermon and say, oh, what a load of rubbish, however did I say that?
Yep.
But at least I read it because that was part of me at that time. And I find that's as good a starting point.
So if it's a starting point, I have no problem with it. If it's the end point as well, that says, oh, it's Sunday morning, I'll just whip it out of it and I'll take that along and do that, then that's a problem. So I'm not saying that the way in which you've thought about the text in the past has nothing to do with the way in which you might interpret it into the future. But what I am saying is that the act of preaching, when we understand both as an act of communication and I think liturgically, what is happening in the preaching is an encounter between the text, the preacher and the people that can only ever be a one-off. And recognizing that it's a one-off means that it's always going to be, there's going to be something not quite right about simply taking what emerged out of an encounter between a preacher, a people and a text 3 years ago and simply assuming that's going to work in a different context. So if it's a starting point, I'm very happy.
Thank you.
There you go. Yep.
You mentioned the use of commentaries. You mentioned the fact that you should probably buy them. As a retiree, I can't afford to buy them.
Yep.
So what parameters will you use to go out and say, okay, this is the one that I'm going to spend my hard-earned cash on? Is it age? Is it source? Is it...
Yeah. I get asked this question a lot, and there's no one straightforward answer to it. But there are some obvious parameters that you would look out for. The first, obviously, is scale. And that's not about saying buy the biggest, fattest, most detailed commentary you can, but it is to encourage you to buy commentaries that feel a kind of step or two ahead of where you feel comfortable in your own understanding of the Bible, so that you're actually being taken somewhere, taken more deeply into the text, which is why I started here rather than with, for example, Brendan Burns' little 120, 130 page commentary on Luke, which is a wonderful little commentary, but it's the kind of commentary that I would put into the hand of a layperson who wants to read through Luke's Gospel through a year, or might be or Tom Wright's For Everyone series, which Tom was my doctoral supervisor or somebody, he'd be horrified if he thought that preachers were preparing simply off the back of one of those commentaries. That's not what they're for. So buy something that just goes a bit beyond. The second thing is obviously look for those commentaries that are more up to date, because very often they'll also summarise work that's been done earlier. So the newer you can find them, the better. And then the third is just be sensitive about and learn and educate yourself a bit just about theological perspective, so that you're not buying commentaries that are so out of sync with your own theology that you'll read them and just get annoyed, which can happen, I believe you me. So that's about learning about publishers. Many commentaries, of course, are published by evangelical publishing houses, because that's where the market is. Some of them are good, some of them less good. The other thing is to just recommend that you shop around. If you were going to buy a one-volume commentary, like a single volume, then my recommendation would be the Oxford Bible Commentary. If you had a kind of investment over a longer period, There's a series in 12 volumes called the New Interpreter's Bible, which will cost you several $100s to get the complete set, but is an excellent kind of ongoing resource. Yeah. Yes, we need to. You need to do some work in a minute, so we'll take these questions and then we'll.
I'm going to ask, how old does the commentary get before it becomes irrelevant and useless?
So never irrelevant. So you can read commentaries from the period of the early church, Augustine, and you can learn things about texts. However, some of what happens in the writing of commentaries is a cumulative thing. People stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before. So very often the best insights travel through time so that they're captured in the most recent volumes. And then a lot of it is also about kind of temperament and tone and assumptions. Detailed commentaries written, for example, any time in the 19th century or early 20th century would either have assumed that you had learned classics at school and therefore you could read Greek without any translation, or they will be really quite twee, pious, expository, kind of spiritual reflection kinds of things. There isn't much in between. Today, there's a whole range of alternatives, of course. So up to date is probably the best thing just to start off with, I think. Yeah. Norman.
I can't remember having done a subject like this in the lay preachers course that I started as a correspondent. Maybe it's Alzheimer's problem, but I think it's just something that wasn't there that actually taught me to look at scripture from that point of view and the commentaries along with it and could be helpful. I think for any lay preacher to have that skill.
Aren't we blessed then that we have our lay education coordinator here who can take that comment as noted, and we can see how we go. So what you do learn in lay preacher training are exegetical skills, right? You learn about exegesis and you learn about the kinds of questions. Broadly speaking, of course, most commentators are operating with those same questions that you learn about. But what they're able to do, because of training and knowledge and study, is to engage with those questions at levels that take you deeper into the text than you would get on your own unless you did the equivalent level of study. So that's why they're companions. Please don't hear me as saying that that the only valid interpretation of a text is one that you'll encounter in a commentary. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that these works of scholarship are companions for any preacher, particularly at that point when you look at the blank sheet of paper and think, I have no idea what I'm going to say about this text. Engagement with this material can prompt you into reflection, your own engagement, and sermon that will follow out of that. There was one more question just behind. Thank you. Yep.
And just a vast amount of information
Yep.
that you can get from it. Is it better just to get a book, commentary book and just work from that to get your ideas, or just go to the vastness of logos?
So material that's available. So for me, there's no difference between book or online. The issue is one of kind of quality control, I guess would be the best way of talking about that. So much of what you'll get through programs like Logos, anything that you'll get free from them is likely to be out of date and therefore out of copyright. But much of what you'll pay for is either this stuff just in electronic form or equivalent quality material. What's much more dangerous, of course, is just stepping into the vast oceans of the World Wide Web and hitting in search terms, because then what comes back, you have very little way, unless you know yourself what's in some of the scholarly work, of what's quality and what isn't. But for me, I still tend to work in print. That's just my own kind of upbringing. But I use electronic software for all sorts of things to do some of the related work in biblical study. Yeah. Yeah.
A statement, not a question. The Presbyterian area recommends to congregations to give lay preachers a hook allowance of approximately $100 a year.
Yep.
So other presbyteries, I think you want to lean on them to recommend that
Okay, so prod your congregations for resources and or your presbyteries, should those resources be available. Yeah. Okay, so on your sheets of paper, you'll see on the last page a task for you to do. So we're going to move to a different text, and it's the story of the temptation. So it's the temptation narrative in Luke chapter 4, which is the text for the first Sunday in Lent next year. So you can all do 15 minutes worth of preparation for the first Sunday in Lent next year right now. Remember to take the notes home. What I've given you is I've given you the commentary on that text from John Carroll's commentary, and you can read the whole thing at your leisure later on. But you'll see that I've asked you to focus on 3 particular questions. Or rather 3 particular details in the commentary, and those details are marked with some lines in the text itself of the commentary, which is printed for you. So what I want you to do is to read the detail and then talk with each other about the kinds of things that you think it prompts in you in relation to possibilities for the focus or the function or the form of a sermon for the first Sunday in Lent. Now, because we've got a lot of tables, the first thing you need to do on your table is just choose which detail you want to look at. So just pick one. So one is a footnote on page 101. The other is the last paragraph on page 102. And the other is a paragraph on page 104. None of it's terribly long. Pick the detail that you want to look at. Read what the commentary says. And then talk with each other about what ideas that prompts in you about possibilities for preaching. Is that clear as a task? Yeah. So do that now for about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll take some quick feedback and then wrap up.